My name is Jeffrey Myers. I'm the rabbi and cantor of Tree of Life or Religica congregation in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh is in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood. Could you tell us more about that surrounding community?
The greater city of Pittsburgh is subdivided into these neighborhoods, all under the same zip code, but rather large, extensive neighborhoods. The Squirrel Hill neighborhood is really a lovely, hilly neighborhood, as you can tell by the name, as is a lot of Pittsburgh. Somewhat mixed neighborhood of a wide range of residents between college students, long-standing people lived in the community for generations, young, medium, old, all mixed in together.
And the Tree of Life Synagogue, what's its first story? When did it become formed in Squirrel Hill?
Tree of Life was formed in 1854 when they broke away from Rodef Shalom congregation that had been formed somewhere about 5 to 10 years prior. And they started their own congregation. They initially met up in what's called the Hill District, another one of the neighborhoods of Pittsburgh where at the time vast numbers of the Jewish community were living. And interestingly enough, the building that they held their first high holiday services in 1854, a scant 2 years later, President Abraham Lincoln gathered in that same building and formed the Republican Party. So Tree of Life has been connected to Pittsburgh and beyond for a very long time. They eventually acquired land in a section of the Hill District in the downtown area and had their first synagogue. It was a retrofit of, I believe it was a church that was already there. The community began to shift over time to closer to more of the Squirrel Hill area. So they then moved to their second location, which was called Craft Avenue. They were there for a good half a century, something in that neighborhood. Then they moved, one final move to their current location at the intersection of Wilkins and Shady, it's called. They've been there since 1952.
You're reminding me of what the listener needs to know as well, that in Squirrel Hill, in New York, in places like Skokie, Illinois, for instance, you have the Jewish community that is sinewed deeply and historically in the life of that area, in the country, in the state. And that's also true of your community as you're identifying. Sometimes I think we think of communities around us perhaps as not being as historically grounded. But of course, it is the case that your community and others are absolutely historically grounded, as you're noting. One of the things that we also talk about and would like to know more about with your community is, how do you describe, as the rabbi, the kinds of rituals, the people, the places, the ways in which you engage the sacred? What is it that we would look for in terms of your understanding of the sacred?
I think the sacred is connected to our daily lives, frequently in ways that people don't even recognize, and that there are continual opportunities to take what one would call the ordinary and make it sacred. And that doesn't apply solely to physical, tangible things,
Okay.
but to acts as well. That when you treat someone with respect even, that simple example is transformed into a sacred act. Throughout the course of COVID-19, we've seen untold numbers of people acting in courageous and loving ways. These ordinary acts become sacred by virtue of the fact that it demonstrates, I think, to me and to many, that of God's presence through the acts of these people. So the sacred, to me, is more than just about a building or the things that are in a building. It's about how we act wherever we go and transform the ordinary and make it sacred.
Rabbi Myers, just to change the topic significantly, we've seen a rise of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism spreading. National and international indices show this. The Southern Poverty Law Center has been telling us and warning us about this for some time. The United Nations as well, we see that. And then we see more flagrant attacks. And if you don't mind, we'd like to know more about how your community is doing on the other side of October 27th, 2018. Tree of Life Synagogue in Squirrel Hill was attacked. It has been identified as the deadliest attack in Jewish history, the Jewish community, I should say, in the United States. First, how is your community doing? And could you share with us what you would like about that day?
I would say that we will always be healing and not healed. When an individual suffers the loss of a loved one, we've come to learn of the different stages of mourning through Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's seminal book on that. And that holds true, I think, for most human beings, that we go through different stages of mourning. And we reach a point of being healed in our new normal. There are occasional reminders, depends upon the frequency of the loved one that passed, throughout the course of the year. But we incorporate that in some way into our being and integrate it as we move forward and accommodate the new normal. What I've come to see in these past 19 months is how her seminal work doesn't apply to a case, in this case, of a massacre, whether it's driving by the Tree of Life building, which as of now is not yet open. We will reopen, but not yet. So driving by that building is a reminder, or knowing, say, in your route that you're going to drive by and purposefully making a detour so you don't have to drive by to see that reminder. There are signs throughout the greater community, all remembering that day with various degrees of whatever their message may be. Those serve as constant reminders. They're in the shops of stores, in the windows of stores and all sorts of businesses, wherever you go. People wear garments that reflect that day. You see people who ask those sorts of questions or were very closely engaged in a variety of activities over those months. So unlike a mourner who can move on, we're constantly, I think, I wouldn't say stuck in this rut, but reminded so frequently of that day through all that we do. Plus, it's referenced, it seems almost daily in some way through the media, whether it's a news report, someone who's written a reflective article. We have constant reminders. I would think that can impact people to varying degrees. For some people, you learn that that's what the new normal is and figure out ways to, again, integrate that into your being and move forward. I would think there's still a vast range of responses for some who can manage it, for some that it could be a setback for the day, that they retreat, that they could be slightly re-traumatized. While I'm not, nor do I pose to be a health professional, I've come to see this entire spectrum of responses.
Well, you may not be a health professional in that regard, but these are your people. And I imagine that you're having to rescript also, as you're mentioning, everything that you know about how grief gets processed. The timeline of healing has a kind of, may I say, even irrationality to it. Unpredictability, I should say. What are the features of healing that you're looking for? And let me say, after there were so many interfaith visuals that were formed from the Jewish Federation for Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall and others, overflowing concern. But now with the time of healing, what are those features that you say, this is salient for us? This is when we know we're moving in the right direction.
Sometimes it's that one step forward, two steps backwards sort of day where, again, like say when there was the shooting in Poway, that takes you all the way back to October 27th. Or when there was the attack, there were attacks in Jersey City, and there was attack in, where was it, in Westchester? I can't remember the place. So it brings you back to that day. Other moments along the way will continue to just bring you back to that day, whether it's the annual remembrance date or at the time and place when a Tree of Life begins to move forward with whatever is going to be done with the physical structure. All of those continue to just remind, and so much of it is new territory because for the Jewish community, we don't have resources to look back upon and say, well, when this happened, this is how the community responded. We're writing that book as we go. So I have no doubt it's going to be filled with mistakes along the way because we're human. But we hope that in the end, at some point, one can look back after a period of time and say, okay, the general trajectory towards healing was in a positive slope over time. There could be little bumps along the way, but that from 30,000 feet, we can see this positive trajectory.
You mentioned you're writing the book now. There are other communities out there who will experience attack in the future if past is precedent. If you could go back, and if you knew what some of the words in the first chapter of that book might have been that would have helped you and would help others, is there something that comes to mind about the power of lamentation or grief, about the power of community that comes to your mind that you might say, this is something to look for? It is a surprise in an otherwise tragic situation.
Certainly one thing is something I learned from my dear friend, Pastor Eric Manning from Mother Emanuel, AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. We both came to the agreement that, alas, we fear this will happen again in the United States. It's not done with. We're grateful that there's been a reprieve for as long as there has been. But when the time comes again that there will be an attack upon a house of worship, that is best of our abilities. Both he and I understand the challenges that clergy have, and that to the best of our abilities, if possible, we will go there to support the clergy of that community, because we understand it in a way that most others do not. So I would say, to me, that's one of the positive unintended outcomes, that we can just say, here's what we've learned, and we're just here, to use another phrase from Pastor Manning, for a ministry of presence.
And that presence includes your community and the surrounding community, doesn't it?
It does, yes.
I want to ask you as well about what's happening currently in the country and your perception as a rabbi watching this, with a growing deeper awareness of what racial and ethnic discrimination can cost us in the present and in the future, and attacks on houses of worship, on the well-being of families, on the health and well-being of communities themselves. Now that we're watching, if you refer to the current fabric of what's happening in the country, do you have comments based on this experience as well, that you think these are things we need to be mindful of today? What are your perceptions of our current time, given your experiences?
I've come to learn over these past 19 months that the most important voices to listen to are the voices of victims, to hear their narrative, to understand where they're coming from, and to learn from them what is it that you need or what is it that you don't need, and try to take that education I've received and apply it to the current new pandemic of racism that hasn't ended in the United States. It's been here for hundreds of years. To listen to, again, the voices of the victims, to be able to hear their narratives and to learn from them, and to be able to hear them say, here are the things that I or we need you to do. For me, as a white male, I couldn't suppose what it means to be a black male in the United States. That would be haughty and arrogant of me to suggest that. That's why I come with a listening ear and a hand outstretched in friendship, saying, I'm here, I want to listen, I want to learn. Help me understand, help teach me what are the things that we can partner to do together.
This question sounds a little bit like the one I asked before, but we've had a very positive, a heartwarming response from people when I ask it this way, which is, for those who, let's say in the last 24 to 72 hours, have experienced some form of an attack on their community, on their house of worship, in a place they call sacred, what do you want that person to know at this moment?
The vast majority of humanity is comprised of good people. Unfortunately, the ongoing publicity is always about the bad, but that does not reflect who we are as human beings. It reflects bad choices of a minority, a very small minority. That should not embitter us to the potential for what life can be like, be it in the United States or around the world, because I've come to see that the vast majority of people are good, decent people who reject very strongly these acts and say that they have no place, they don't belong on this planet. I know that for a fact through the emails, cards, letters that I've received and continue to receive over these past 19 months, that this is indeed who humanity is. Just that the scales are so imbalanced because media love to report only the tragic and bad. there's no interest in reporting the good and beautiful. That doesn't sell. So that we should remain strong in our faith because overall humanity is good.
Thank you very much for that. Thanks for taking the time to answer that question so directly. What's a hope that you have going forward for your community, for the country, or what's a hope that, or something else? What's a story that has stayed with you and is the most inspiring, that is an indication of what you just said, a deeper sense of goodness in humanity?
I would say the story that comes to mind was, I can't tell you how soon after the massacre in the synagogue that this moment occurred. We were getting literally thousands of pieces of mail. When all is said and done, I don't know how many thousands of pieces of mail we received. Counts are well over 10,000. Exactly what the final total is, I do not know. Anything that came to me, I opened and read. Yes, it took months to catch up, but I felt that if someone could take the time to write something, I could find the time to read it. Received a piece from a young boy. I would say, I don't even think he was 10 years old yet. And it was a small sealed package of a brand new toy. And his note was something to the extent that he felt sad about what happened and thought that this toy could perhaps cheer up some child who's sad. And it said to me, that's why my hope springs eternal, because there are thousands of good stories like that. So I saved the toy and I saved the note as part of a modest collection of the ones that really touched me. That doesn't mean that it may touch others, but I have a collection of those pieces that help remind me when days can be really scary or sad, that little boy brightens my day and reminds me that A, we can do better, but B, we must do better.
You have been listening to the Center for Religious Wisdom and World Affairs in cooperation with the Religica Theolab.